Infernax is a side-scroller metroidvania that mashes two styles of gameplay from two different games together and reinvents them: Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, and Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. And making a game inspired by these two games is a brave attempt because these are both over 30-year-old classics that have a lot of issues, especially Castlevania. So let's take a look at how Infernax uses these two inspirations to create a modern game and make it appealing to a grown-up demographic. Welcome to the channel, this is Reviews from the Void. In Infernax, you control a knight who is also a duke of this land that is being ravished by all manner of demons, and people will look up to you to purge them from it. The towns are very reminiscent of Zelda 2 and Simon's Quest, with shops to visit and purchase improvements to your gear, and NPCs to talk to and learn about what's been going on, with several of them providing you with side quests to complete. The locations are grim and eerie like a Castlevania game, and it even has a day and night cycle straight from Simon's Quest that changes the enemies and that has to be taken in consideration in order to complete side quests correctly. In every other aspect, this is a typical Metroidvania, with a big map to explore and many obstacles impeding your progress, for which you'll have to learn an ability or two or three in order to pass through. Now let's take a look at each aspect of this game and score it as we do it. Graphics and sound. In its entire presentation, Infernax goes heavy on the 8-bit look and sound. I realize that this is on purpose to draw as much nostalgia from our main senses as possible, but in my opinion the characters ended up a bit too squared, with too many straight lines and right angles in their sprites. But that, I'm happy to say, is pretty much the only complaint I have for the artwork. The scenery is fine with varied locations, enemies and especially bosses are beautifully grotesque in the most awesome ways I've ever seen. I mean, seriously, this game is very gory and disturbing, but in a fabulous way. It's weird actually, I don't know how they did it. Plus there are several little cutscenes spread through the game that really improved my appreciation for the graphics in Infernax. As for the music, I think it suffers from some of the same problems as the graphics. It is too 8-bit chiptune-y. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like me some chiptunes, but some of the high-pitched notes are too shrieking and can cause you to want to turn the music off during long exposures. But the compositions themselves are fine. Not to the level of, say, The Messenger, that also delivers a chiptune soundtrack, but it's still very good. The sound effects are also perfectly fine. So in graphics and sound, Infernax scores a 1.4 out of 2. Gameplay and challenge. This is where they modernize things, thankfully. The movement controls are smooth and tight, providing a great feeling to both the combat as well as the platforming. The combat especially is my favorite aspect of this game. It's all about the positioning, just like Zelda 2, because both you as well as most enemies have short-ranged and otherwise limited attacks. You'll also have to make use of your crouched attack and be mindful of enemies doing the same, also just like Zelda 2. But of course, Infernax thankfully doesn't have all the jankiness from old titles, nor the infinite respawning enemies that were incredibly aggravating. You also learn new abilities and spells, and once more it is inspired by Zelda 2, at least with the down thrust. Some skills are also used in the platforming, which can be very challenging in some sections. There is one feature from old games that Infernax keeps that I wish it didn't. Taking damage will push you back and forward, causing you to fall from pitfalls to your death. We all know that damage that pushes you coupled with instant death falls can be very unnerving, and it is true for this game as well. Another problem I had with the gameplay was with the forward dash skill. You lose control completely of your character and he dashes way farther than expected, which leads to unfair deaths. But those were my only complaints and they are rather minor issues. Every other time you die, it's because you sucked at the combat. Dying will happen a lot, but whether it's punishing or not depends on the difficulty you chose. Classic mode will make you lose all your progress since the last save point, while casual mode lets you pick up immediately. This is nice as it tailors the game to both tastes. Meanwhile, actually succeeding in this game is very tough, especially in later boss fights, but nowhere near as hard as the games it pulls from. Platforming sections and even regular enemies will pose serious threats sometimes, but you have all the tools required to succeed, and most times I died, I succeeded in the second attempt. So I found the difficulty to be on point, challenging but not unfair. So all things considered, gameplay and challenge are the defining aspects of Infernax and where it shines the brightest, getting a 1.8 out of 2. Bang for buck. Infernax's full price is $19.99. It's available on the Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One and Series, and PCs through Steam. $19.99 is a bit overpriced here. The game is fantastic, but for a metroidvania it's also kind of short, lasting less than 10 hours. However, and this is a big however, there is a strong incentive to replay tied to the morality system. I'm not getting into detail about it now, but suffice to say, the paths you can choose differ wildly. Many, if not all, interactions with NPCs are potentially affected by the choices you make. So much that there is a huge part of me that wants to replay Infernax, choosing everything opposite. So for that, the score in Bang for Buck is raised significantly to 1.6 out of 2. The sauce. The sauce is the main aspect of any game. It is that special thing that binds all other aspects together and gives it a particular taste, resulting in much more than the simple sum of the parts, for better or worse. One of my favorite things about Infernax is the setting. Not so much the foreboding landscapes inspired by Castlevania, but much more the Middle Age setting. The NPCs address you as my lord, as you control a noble, and at several points your character makes use of his noble status to get the others to give him information, or even scolding some for not complying to the expected submission. The theme of religion and faith is very well represented, with many spiritual symbols that are also found upside down in unholy places, giving them an even more sinister tone. All those things plus the grotesque looking demons, very Dante's Inferno like, contribute in creating a very oppressive Dark Ages atmosphere and tone, which made me feel immersed in this Middle Age setting playing the part of a noble, and this was quite impressive for a game with such primitive graphics. Also linked to the atmosphere aspect, at several points in the game you'll be faced with a morality conundrum with two options for dealing with a problem, and only in the beginning they are kind of obvious right and wrong, but most are more complex, leaving you wondering if you made the right choice or not. This ethics system coupled with the setting makes any choice you make very plausible. Even if you're naturally inclined to do the right thing, the morally wrong one will feel fitting in many occasions as well, making the whole thing very interesting. The level design in Infernax is also a positive, as it forces you to use the abilities you learn primarily for combat to do the traversal as well, in a challenging and fulfilling way. Infernax still has a few problems though. Choosing classic mode will lead to a bit of frustration beyond the intended loss of progress. That's because you don't have access to multiple save files, and will be forced to make moral decisions with unpredictable outcomes, which will probably cause you to reload your file to choose the other one. And even worse, sometimes you feel like you made the choice you wanted, so you save, only to find out later that it was the unintended one. That happened to me once and it sucked, because the only way left to fix it was to replay the whole game again. I don't see why we couldn't have multiple save files. There was also one side quest that I could not for the life of me figure out what I was supposed to do, and I'm to this point still wondering if it was because I made some moral decision wrong or because I just couldn't find the right NPC to talk to or what. So although a mostly positive feature, the morality system has its problems. Finally, it needs to be said that the twisted, gruesome creatures as well as the insane amount of gore in this game can be a turnoff for some, and the high difficulty can also feel too much for some people probably. But in the end, it's certainly a positive mix of features, resulting in a great sauce for Infernax, worthy of a 3.5 out of 4. So Infernax achieves a final score of 8.3 out of 10. It's certainly a formidable metroidvania that mixes a lot of its own personality with nostalgic inspirations very successfully. It's bound to appeal to old school gamers as well as newcomers if they don't mind the retro graphics and sound, but it's absolutely perfect for the demographic that has been playing games for over 25 years. It's also worth highlighting that this is Zelda 2 and Castlevania 2 done right all these years later, and since those are two very flawed games, I see this as a rather impressive achievement. Congrats to Berserk Studio for this. And that's it for the review. If you liked it, consider subscribing to help me make more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.